Welcome back to Gruber Motor Company. I'm Pete Gruber.
I'm Mark Schaffner, and good afternoon. Welcome to the Tesla Roadster Roundtable podcast.
This is the weekly podcast we do for Tesla Roadster owners. The picture behind you there is a lightning green Tesla Roadster that was really my first Tesla. And this picture was taken in downtown Phoenix by the Biltmore on the south side where I forget the name of that big hotel there, the Ritz-Carlton.
Yeah.
And the car was so striking, I thought, you know what, let's get rid of the color in the back of the picture. So I did one of those Photoshop things where you create an extra layer, and then you turn that into a black and white, and then you use your delete tool to bring through the other layer underneath, and you suddenly have color in the areas that you're deleting. So that's what that is. It was a fun car, lightning green. So today in our Tesla Roadster podcast, again, any questions that you may have, feel free to ask them. We'll try to get to all the questions as they come in. While we're still talking about getting started here, tomorrow we have a special guest, Ingemar Anderson, an author of a book. What's the name of the book?
It's called The Future is Electric.
Okay. We spoke to him today and in preparation for the podcast tomorrow, and he asked us, he said, have you guys been promoting this book? We said, why? Well, he says, I'm getting a lot of orders on Amazon, so apparently it's popular. And I said, well, every podcast, actually, we've been plugging the book, so maybe that's what this is about, or maybe you just have a great book.
I'm hoping it's a little bit of both. I know that I've read the book. I do recommend it. I do recommend you go to Amazon and look at it and purchase a copy. It's a great book that'll give the person who is considering electric vehicles and what they can do and stuff, kind of some background information. It's almost like EVs for Dummies type of book.
Right. Great book. Can you guys throw up the Tesla Roadster newsletter site? And we can move right into today's topic. What we find is that on our website we have some Roadster tools and products and repositories of information that are quite popular. And the newsletters actually is something we started in 2017, I think. And there were, of course, always questions, how do I do this with my Roadster, especially new owners and or existing Roadster owners that began seeing certain behaviors in the Roadster, service issues that came up. And what we decided to do was create a newsletter section on our website for those kinds of topics.
Do you want the newsletters page, or do you want the newest one that we made?
The newsletters page showing all of them together. One of the first things that we broke tradition with was there was, for a period of time in the Roadster community, a feeling that the restricted access in the Tesla Roadster, which was password accessible, should not be given to owners. And this is where you find a lot of information about what's going on under the hood in your Roadster, like your calculated amp hour capacity, which now is extremely important to anyone selling their Roadster because it tells you the health of the battery. And there were other things. I think that Tesla originally miscalculated, thinking that owners weren't going to be interested in technical information like this, and just the opposite ended up being true. So we really broke tradition, and one of our first newsletters is, okay, guys, we're going to tell you what this top secret password is. And it turns out the password is 1050, and if you were affiliated with Tesla in the early days, it would help you remember the password because they picked the street, 1050 Bing Street address, for that password. So what that allows you to do is to go into a special section on your vehicle display screen. You tap it 5 or 6 times in the non-interactive display section, and up will pop a question. Do you want to go into the advanced features, and what is the password? And that's where you put your 1050. So that was one of the first newsletters, and then we continued from there. So what I have today is the newest newsletter is Collection of Roadster Tips. and just created this yesterday, actually. And this is a listing of about 25 or 30 different tips that we had at the bottom of each newsletter. What it would typically be is you would have a main theme in the newsletter and then a special tip down on the bottom, which was brief and short. So this is actually a collection of those. And as soon as we put this up, by the way, this morning, we already had someone in Belgium, a Roadster owner, that asked for some more of these and if we have a hard copy of it.
You know, as we go through these tips today, I've had read through them, and there's going to be a lot of tips that apply to EV owners in general a little bit more as well. As you go through the tips, I'll help point out some of those things.
Very true. Yep, excellent. All right, so one of the first tips that we have here is the charging settings to avoid. Now, again, when Tesla created the Roadster, they thought this was going to be a good idea. It's called storage mode. And in storage mode, you use very little of the battery. It only charges to 20%, which on the surface seems like a good idea. What ended up happening, however, is if you were putting it in storage mode because you were going to be gone for a few weeks or on vacation or whatever, not near the car, it would only charge to about 20%. And if you had a problem, a lightning storm came through, it tripped the circuit breaker as the power went off, the distance from 20% charge to zero being bricked is very quick and very short. And we have had a number of Roadsters that have come into our service center that were the result of a storage mode bricking. It even happens if you leave it plugged in and you go away for 2 months and your circuit breaker tripped in regular charge mode, because it doesn't take long for that Roadster to brick. So what we have recommended is stay away from storage. Leave the charge cable, the yellow charge cable, which is your 15 amp charge, plugged in at all times. And the car will decide when it needs a charge. And at least you have more time than that 20% charge that you normally get with storage mode.
Well, haven't you found historically, Pete, that the Roadster will go from a full standard range charge to near 0% in anything from about 7 to 10 days, unless there are other conditions such as heat or cold that may make it even go faster than that?
Yeah, that would be a worst case scenario during summer, for example, especially here in Phoenix, because the fan is running a lot of the time trying to cool the battery. And but yeah, you can get anywhere from 7 to 10 days to 2 weeks to even a month or two before you have a problem.
Oh, okay.
And it depends on the temperature, like you were saying, if the car is not using a lot of power. In the Roadster, and the next question that usually comes up, and this hasn't been asked yet, is this problem unique to Tesla Roadsters, or will my Model S, Model 3, X, Y have the same problem? The answer to that is the other later Model S's have this problem solved. It does not. It is not affected. They have contactors actually inside the battery pack that open up and disconnect everything. So essentially, your battery pack is doing the same thing that the cells were doing when they were in storage in the warehouse and inventory, waiting to be built to go into production.
Sure, that totally makes sense. And it's one of the things, features of the Roadster being kind of the first of a generation of cars. They just didn't realize at the time that 20% was not necessarily safe.
Right. I think we just broke a record here. We haven't had any questions for like 10 minutes. Is that possible, or are we broke?
No, we are not seeing them. Richard, what are you seeing over there on TikTok? Anything?
We do not have any questions coming in just yet.
Okay. Well, we have a question for you then. Do you guys have any questions?
Very true. And Pete, do you want the cutaway screen with the tips behind you for this while you're doing all this?
Yeah. Let's put that up.
Okay.
It'll show them where to go. So another Tesla tip. The VIN story is still unfolding. Now, this came to light when we received a request to sell 2 Founder Series Roadster and Model S. These happen to be the same VIN numbers, too. They're Founder Series VIN number 3. And So what we were trying to do was confirm that the Founder Series cars were made in Hethel, UK. Legend had it that, and I own VIN number 5. That's how I'm very interested in this. If a VIN started with SFZ instead of 5YR, which was US based, it would indicate that the car was made in the UK by Lotus in Hethel, UK. The most recently, though, in checking with Tom Greiner, who is the Roadster historian, it looks like that may not be the case, because in the VIN decoder, in fact, we could throw that up, guys. If you click on the newsletter that I think it's the second to newest, which has the VIN decoder, and hopefully that picture that's in there showing the VIN schedule for Roadsters will be clear enough where you can see the discrepancy that we're finding. So the there we go. And if we go up a little bit, if you notice digit number 11, the legend there says that if it's a 3, it is made in Hethel, UK. If it's a 1, it was made in US. Now, let's define made for a moment. This is going to get a little complicated.
Okay.
When Tesla was going to build sports cars, they knew they didn't have a facility to build body panels, so they went to a variety of auto manufacturers to try to find a sports car glider that would fit the bill and that they could put a battery into. And Lotus was the one that stepped up to the plate and said, we'll sell you a bunch of Lotus Elise gliders, empty shells, and you can, put batteries in those, and you can electrify them to your heart's content. Well, the original legend was that the first 11 Tesla Roadsters were actually built 100% in the UK. And it was a logistics nightmare because the battery packs were being built in Thailand by a barbecue manufacturer. Those then had to be shipped to Hethel, UK, put in the car. Then they had to be shipped to the United States for sale. So eventually they scrubbed that program, and the battery packs were eventually made in the US, and the gliders, the empty gliders, were shipped to Tesla. Well, this current understanding is that we're not really sure at this point how many Teslas were 100%, how many Tesla Roadsters were 100% built in Hethel, UK. So anyway, that was the tip in one of the newsletters, is that right now there's a discrepancy as to how many were, and we're still gathering information from owners and Lotus and Tesla employees to shed light on this issue. And again, since this is a collaborative podcast, those of you listening, if any of you can clear up these cobwebs, we would very much appreciate hearing from you. If you have any inside information, work for Tesla, etc., that would be great to know. So the discrepancy here is in that VIN decoder. The first section says SFZ was 100% built in Hethel, UK. However, later on, you have those two other conditions, which is a 3 confirming that, or a 1 was built in US. So if you have an SFZ with a 1 in the 11th digit, we're not really sure where that car was built. So for now, at least, the Founder's VIN number 3 that is for sale, we're not sure what its origin was, whether it was 100% built in Hethel.
Because it has an SFZ for the first 3 digits that indicates UK, and it has a number 1 in the 11th digit, which indicates US.
Exactly.
Oh,
yes.
Okay. Now we have a couple of follows and a couple of questions that have come in. First, FDO DCPD has followed us on TikTok. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And welcome to the podcast. William F. has also shared our TikTok stream, so we appreciate you doing that, and hopefully the friend or family member you've shared with also has picked up and watching us. Brandon on TikTok asks us, is there any word on the new Roadster or the 2.0 Roadster that we've heard recently?
We don't have inside track from Tesla for things like this. Generally, what they withhold from the public are the same things that they withhold from us regarding things like this. Where the collaboration between us and Tesla occurs is on the technical side of things regarding Roadster repair. So we're not, we don't have any more information than you guys do. And of course, we're all excited about getting this car out here someday so that we can all enjoy it and drive it.
Yes. Brandon also asks us, do you support legislation forcing people to own and drive electric vehicles?
Boy, those are a couple of terms that I've never felt comfortable in, co-joined government enforcing.
Yeah.
So, no, I'm not in favor of any of that. It just seems like the cooperation level with EV adoption is happening all on its own. I don't think anybody has to legislate this. And of course, whenever government gets involved in anything, they pretty much mess it up. So,
Absolutely. I totally agree with you on that, Pete. The idea of government forcing people to make a particular choice, it happens too much as it is.
exactly.
And very honestly, even though the $7,500 credit seems like a wonderful thing, that is an awful lot of government intervention in the EV infrastructure as well. And my political view would be more along the line of let the market decide what gets sold and what doesn't, and kind of stop the government interference.
Better question is, why would you want to drive something that's not electric?
Good question.
That's a
Yeah,
great
yeah.
question, Jesse.
I was just about to say, I was watching one of the early reveals. I think it was for the Model S, and in preparation for B-roll for this video we're making. And Elon went on stage and basically said that he was like, we have to make them better than anything else. And I think that, to your point, Pete, this rapid adoption is a result of that effort of them, of Tesla just making these cars better than ICE cars. You know?
Exactly. We had visitors earlier today, and I was giving them a tour, and they were asking about Gruber Motor Company, and do we use customer testimonials, and how do we go to market? And I said, yes, we have testimonials on our website, but we don't depend on that. For any business to be successful, there's a little slogan over by Victor's office, and it said, "Customers are the reason we exist." And if that mantra is ingrained in the culture of any company, then you naturally know the right thing to do at all times. And, you're going to be successful in business. So anyway, I wanted to share that.
I think that's a great point that you share as well. And so Brandon has followed up with us on TikTok. He says, terrific and knowledgeable answers. Thank you. Earned my follow. Well, and thank you, Brandon. And we're sure glad to have you following us.
And then we have a TikTok comment, user, and then there's about 15 digits or so. So I'll just leave it with users. He says, I know you have been asked several times, but why do you wear sunglasses all the time? Well, I guess my answer to that is I don't wear them all the time. My wife wouldn't let me at home. I think she would get tired of that.
Yeah, probably would.
So, but we are planning on a big reveal at some point with a video that explains this whole sunglass phenomena with Gruber Motor Company and the Gruber podcast and the Gruber videos.
Accompanied with some merch, of course. We'll be selling some glasses.
Exactly. There'll be
Yeah.
a lot of swag. And you know what? We're finding that the people, our guests, are interested in also wearing sunglasses. Tomorrow, we're going to have the author of this book that we talked about.
Right.
And he said, I actually went out and bought myself a special pair of sunglasses for this podcast.
Oh, that's fantastic. I
Yes.
didn't know that.
Telling you, Pete, we're going to have to start sending our guests some Gruber branded sunglasses.
That too, yes, without a doubt.
With that.
All right, so we've got another tip here. The Legacy ESS main battery pack advice for the Roadster. This tech tip reads like this. In conversations with J.B. Straubel, who was the chief technology officer of Tesla for over a decade, actually I think it was 12 or 14 years, I forget now, and heavily involved in the Roadster battery pack design. Well, he admitted to us last year that the pack was really designed for a 10-year lifespan or service life. And he said, we're all pleasantly surprised and pleased that Roadsters with original battery packs are still going strong after 15 years. He has two of them, by the way. One is a non-pedigreed Roadster, but one of the Roadsters he owns was really the first Roadster built. It was a test mule, and it was pretty badly beat up. You know how these validation prototypes go through a number of different types of tests? Well, apparently the employees wanted to give JB a present, so they put this thing back together, fixed a lot of things on it, and he has the first Roadster with the first Tesla ESS battery pack in it. And at the time I spoke to him last year, that pack was still running.
Wow.
Yeah. So, however, the cells in these older battery packs are marginalized by age. No one expected them to last this long. We do not recommend doing any more range charging. What that is in a Tesla Roadster is you go to 100% state of charge, and it's what you would do with your later model Teslas if you're going to take a long trip and you don't want to go to 80% because you don't want to stop as often to charge. You can go to 100% occasionally, and it won't take its toll on the batteries. But with these older marginalized cells, we're not recommending that, and also not depleting the state of charge below 30 miles range. And finally, the charging method. Keep that yellow charge cable plugged into the Roadster at all times. It's the safest, slowest, and most gentle way to charge your battery in that Tesla Roadster. The yellow charge cable, by the way, is a 15 amp AC charge. One other thing that you want to make sure of is that you have it plugged into a dedicated outlet. And what I mean by that is in not commercial, but in residential construction, through code, you're allowed to daisy chain outlets, which means that you can have one on one side of the wall, the same circuit on the other side of the wall. And, things are okay if you have bedroom lamps connected to it or a clock, radio, or something like that. But if you put a toaster on the other side, or in a commercial setting, like a copy machine or a microwave, and, then you're not going to have enough power. So what ends up happening is you're going to trip the circuit breaker, first of all, and if it's marginalized, you're going to heat that GFI plug that's on the end of the yellow cable. So anyway, we recommend a dedicated circuit and keeping that yellow charge cable plugged in at all times.
This advice is like you said, it's general advice for EVs as well. We were talking in a recent podcast about kind of the 80-20 rule for EV charging, and I had done some additional research after that. The ideal for an electric vehicle battery, regardless Roadster or any other kind, is not practical because it says you don't charge above 70 and you don't get below 65. But the next best ideal is more like a 75-25 rule, where you try not to charge above about 75% and not below about 25. The 80-20 rule that's been widely talked about holds pretty true. And a standard mode charge on a Roadster is about that 80% level. I'm thinking with the range that you get on a Roadster, 30 miles is about 20% left of the charge as well.
Okay, so it's a good range to stay within then.
Yeah, most definitely.
And one thing I want to clarify, Mark, you might know about this. I don't think this 80%, 70% charging applies to new batteries. Is that correct? Because I don't want to scare anybody away from a new Tesla. We're talking about older battery tech here, right?
Well, it depends on the type of battery. The newer batteries that are starting to come out with the Model 3s and Model Ys, the LFP batteries, don't really have this rule apply to them because that lithium iron phosphate chemical is a little bit different than the older LiPo batteries, and it is more designed to be able to take a charge and not overheat when it gets all the way to 100%. So that is a good point that you bring up, Jesse.
And, as the battery chemistries change, the rules change constantly. Do you remember the old tool batteries where they had memory and you had to take them out of that range or it would get stuck, Well, all of these chemistries are going to alter the rules every time that something new comes out.
Yep. On Facebook, Jiminy Stack has joined us this afternoon. Welcome back. He said that J.B. Straubel started in 2004. He worked for 14 years at Tesla, left in 2018. J.B. started a battery recycling company.
Redwood Materials, yep.
And if I remember right, JB is about to be voted on to become one of the 3 members of the board of directors for Tesla as well.
I'm sure they're going to welcome him back.
I think they will too.
All right. So how to preserve your Tesla Roadster battery. We've got a number of additional tips here. And by the way, feel free to chime in at any point in time, just like Jiminy did. This is a collaborative effort. Our Roadster battery repair services require a fair share of research and development, this tip starts off with. And we are now observing and reacting to aging pack issues and behavior.
Pete?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we got to get the mic in front of you a little bit.
All right, let me turn it this way. There we go. This is beginning to reveal some interesting data, vulnerabilities all related to preserving legacy Roadster battery packs aged 10 to 12 years. Now, that was when this was written. They're like 15 years now for the legacy packs that came out in 2008. So we saw an interesting pattern begin to emerge as these packs aged. And there are resistive cells that are beginning to manifest. And typically what happens is in a brick, you have a collection of 69 cells, 18650s, all connected in parallel. And as one of those goes resistive, it begins to become parasitic. In other words, it's acting like the load that it's supposed to feed. So the other 68 cells in that brick now are not only supporting the loads in the car, but also trying to keep this battery up to a certain level. And the end result is that it begins to decline in voltage. The brick declines in voltage. And the Roadster has a number of safety mechanisms built into it that consider that a dangerous situation. Because if you overcharge a 18650 or a lithium-ion cell, it can ignite, it can catch fire. So the safety systems begin to regulate how much charge that pack can handle. And your first symptom when you have a resistive cell is that your range begins to decline abnormally. Now, there's normal range decline based on age in a Roadster, and it's not uncommon to go from 172 miles down maybe 5 miles over a period of a year. When you get rapid range losses, and we're talking about as many as 5 to 10 per charge, you now have a blazing resistive cell that is becoming worse. Now, the dangerous part here is if you let this run its course, it's going to take that brick down below 2 volts. And one of the weaknesses of 18650 cells is if they spend too much time below 2 volts, it causes a chemical destructive process. And now your 68 other good cells in that brick are going to be compromised and eventually fail. So that's the time that you need to get the car into a shop like ours that can identify and find that one needle in a haystack, that one resistive cell out of 6,831, neutralize it, basically take it out of circuit, and then restore power to that brick. And then the car continues to drive. Fortunately, what we're finding is that these aberrations with a resistive cell are not yet indications of end-of-life failure. An end-of-life failure in that pack would indicate that a bunch of them are going bad, like lemmings going into the sea. By the way, I just found out that that's a myth. Lemmings do not go into the sea.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I had been using that for years. So anyway, I need to point that out just to make that accurate for the fact checkers out there. Yeah,
thank you.
But so these cells, typically a resistive cell, it's usually only one. Once you get rid of it, that car continues to drive for many years thereafter. So and the other thing is, the first thing that you do when you have a battery problem or you can't charge, you want to pull that service plug on a Tesla Roadster, because what that does is it disconnects all of the loads in that car that are draining that battery. That's what they're doing in the later Model S's. They do that with a contactor rather than manually unplugging, the battery pack.
Okay.
But the reason that unplugging a service pack in a Roadster with a resistive cell that is declining doesn't work is because that resistive cell is going to drain that brick, whether there's an external load or not, because itself is the load in that brick.
Correct. Now, I know that I've looked at some log files over the years as well, And the log is a wonderful tool for us to be able to go from the 6,800 plus cells all the way down to the group of 69 cells where we have resistive cell. So it's not like we're having to have somebody go through and 1,749, 1,750, and test all 6,800 cells.
And then the next challenge becomes identifying one resistive cell in a group of cells that's all connected in parallel because they all look the same.
Right.
So we have a highly evolved, specialized process that actually allows us to isolate that one cell out of those 69 that is causing this problem. So it looks like we have a question from YouTube Shorts. Nice Geek is his name, The Nice Geek. Well, welcome. And he said, what is this podcast? Well, this is our weekly Tesla Roadster podcast where we give some equal time to all of the Roadster owners. And the Tesla Roadster, the first generation at least, there were 2,400 built. There are about 2,000 or so owners left in the world according to our census program on our website.
That's right.
And we give them some equal time. Eventually, the Roadster ownership, of course, will increase exponentially as this new Hyper Roadster comes out. But in the meantime, the first-generation Roadster owners get their own weekly podcast, which, by the way, brings me to another topic. Next week, Thursday morning at 10 a.m., we're going to again attempt to have the German company, which is going to join us, Conrad Buck. His company is called Mars Orbiter, and he repairs Teslas in Germany. So we're going to give him some equal time. We talked about him actually doing a FaceTime and showing us his service center in Germany. But he'll be joining us at 10 o'clock. We tried to have him on last Wednesday, and 4 o'clock our time is like 2 a.m. their time. And he was falling asleep at his desk, so we scrubbed that podcast.
Yeah, that would have been a difficult one, especially because if I remember right, he had a 6 a.m. flight to catch that next morning as well.
Exactly, yep.
On TikTok, Rowan has asked a question of us. He says, do you think vintage electric cars will be a niche market one day like vintage cars, gasoline cars are right now?
Very much so. My opinion on this is, and having gone through it myself, as you age, you're going to want to relive periods of your life. And for me, it was my high school years, and that's why I liked 60s muscle cars.
Okay.
I remember the guys that used to beat my 63 Ford Comet with a 144 cubic inch engine in it. And they usually had the Mopars or the Chevys, the SS Chevys with the 327s or even 396s in them. And, of course, the Mopars. We didn't have any Hemi guys in high school. I couldn't afford that. But we even had a guy that had a Corvette, by the way. But anyway, as these groups or as these generations go through their life cycles, they're going to want to relive certain periods of their life. And, cars are very much a part of that. There's a whole, feeling that goes with that. You don't have to be a car person to appreciate that. My wife even liked her 60 Chevy Impala, for example.
Sure.
She felt like Thelma and Louise. This thing had a front seat that was the size of our living room couch, But I think there's going to be a huge market for vintage electric conversions. And, definitely a niche market. We have a shop here that's right next to Gruber Motor Company. It's called Hot Rods by Dean. And any given day, you'll see 30s, 40s, 50s, all the muscle cars out there, wonderfully restored, just meticulously recreated with upgraded crate engines and lots of chrome and the performance exhaust. And, Dean, the owner, freely admits, he says, yeah, all of my customers are rich old guys.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what are you going to do with your money by the time you get to that age, right? Have some fun and enjoy or relive your youth.
Try to spend all your kids' inheritance.
Exactly, yes.
Pete, real quick, I want to pull up something for you to look at, too.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try and make a comparison here. I don't know if it's going to work.
All right.
But the Ford Model T came out in 1908.
Okay.
The Tesla Roadster came out in 2008, right?
All right.
So that's kind of like the Model T of the electric revolution, in my opinion. So, we haven't even gotten into the beginning of electric cars yet. So, whatever
Yeah.
electric vintage cars will be someday, we haven't even seen them yet. We're still so early on. I think it's got a long way to go.
That's an excellent observation because, the feeling now is that the Roadster really is the first EV. There
Yeah.
was an EV1 in 1908. There were taxi cabs in New York. Everybody knows that story. But what ignited the EV passion? It was the Roadster. It wasn't the EV1. It wasn't, all the other cars it wasn't golf carts.
Right.
The Tesla Roadster was a sports car, a two-seater. They're all brightly colored, and it really did, I think, ignite that passion and that EV adoption rate. And then, of course, having Tesla come along with a more sensible car shortly after the Roadster made this thing mainstream. You now had a four-door grocery getter that the family could get into and still enjoy all the benefits of an EV.
Well, and to the point earlier from Brandon's question, this was an excellent car that happened to be powered by electricity and a battery.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a battery car. It wasn't a novelty. It was a top quality car that could start up and go, 0 to 60 faster than anything else, even though its top speed wasn't necessarily that impressive compared to other sports cars. And it was because of that, because of the quality of the car it was, not the quality of electric car it was, is why the entire revolution took off, in my opinion.
Yeah. We're very familiar with so many Roadster owners, having worked in that community now for, almost a decade. These people are passionate about their cars. They love these little Roadsters.
Oh, yeah.
One of the biggest problems was 4 years ago or so when Tesla decided that they didn't have enough parts for Roadsters anymore. They had been buying parts from us, and they were cleaning us out too.
Mm-hmm.
And they decided, it's not cost effective for us to attempt to recreate these parts. Why don't we just simply put a buyback program together and allow people to upgrade and go into a Model 3 from a Tesla Roadster? The miscalculation was that they didn't tell people at the time what they were going to do with their Roadsters once they purchased them. And these Roadster owners many of them would not have sold them their car had they known that it was going to be parted out.
Well, we have several stories of owners that found out afterwards that their beloved Roadster was sitting across the country on parts shelves to be put into other cars, and they were just devastated by it.
Right. And it's not your Ford and Chevy. If your Chevy gets left outside and the seats get wet or the leather gets ruined, once you've owned the car, you're done with it. You've got a new car, you're feeling better. But
Yeah.
with Roadsters, it just wasn't that kind of a car. And of course, they quickly corrected that. I remember sending an email to Jerome Gillen at the time, the president of Tesla, and explained to him, look, you really got to get full disclosure here. We actually ended up rescuing a Roadster from Chicago because I knew what was going to happen to the second last Roadster built, VIN 1457.
Right.
It had 7,000 miles on it. It had been sitting on the showroom floor next to all of the Ferraris and for years because they were a Ferrari dealership. And pristine, still had the new car odor on the inside. And once I found out that car was going to be sold to Tesla for parts, I struck a deal with the owner.
Yeah, and I remember that particular car.
It's our electric blue that's sitting in the service center.
That's right. On TikTok, Gizmo Duck has asked us, when is Tesla going to start recycling their own batteries?
I don't know that, but with the relationship with JB's company, with Redwood Materials, I understand that Redwood is even expanding and building close to a Tesla production facility. So it may not be necessary for Tesla to go into that business, since the relationship with Redwood would be there. And excellent supply chain logistics when you think about it. Right now,
Yeah.
lithium is mined in South America. It's got to get shipped all the way to the U.S. to be processed or to China to be processed. Horribly inefficient, and it negates all of the gains that you get by going emission-free or, sustainable energy.
Yeah.
So this definitely has a lot of advantages written all over it. Not only do you have high-grade ore that is coming into these recycling facilities, the battery recycling facilities, but then with a very short supply chain, path to where it's being reused and an endless supply of being able to reuse it, this makes a lot of sense.
Well, and from what we understand, Redwood Materials is able to recycle something around 98% of the materials that are going into these batteries.
Hey,
So it's
guys.
incredibly efficient. Yes.
They're actually doing this in the Nevada plant right now.
Are they?
Tesla is. Yeah, they're in 20. I'm trying to get the 2022 numbers, and I can't find it for you guys. But according to 2021, let's see here. They were Tesla reported that it achieved 92% battery cell material recovery in its new recycling process. And it recycled 1,300 tons of nickel, 400 tons of copper, and 80 tons of cobalt in 2020.
Amazing. Okay. Well, thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, Aaron.
It's also worth noting when we discussed with Sandy, he said that he had information stating that the recycle rate and the necessity for recycling was extremely low.
Mm-hmm.
Right, he had touched on that for a little bit and said that at the pack level, I believe he said it was virtually non-existent.
Interesting.
Yeah. And yet Jiminy Stack has chimed in on Facebook again where he says, Tesla is recycling their batteries now in 2023. So that reiterates what Aaron had just said. And they're saying that it's 98% reusable material, which is the number that I had heard. Yes. So on YouTube, Lightning Rod commented on our
The vintage cars.
vintage cars, old man spending their money. He says, "Spend it now." Hello from Thunder Bay, Canada, everyone, and it was foundational Roadster. Well, hello, Lightning Rod. Welcome back. And I do remember now, Thunder Bay is near Minnesota.
Right, right. You know what we've also had with some of the Roadster owners that chime in? Tell us your VIN. Everybody remembers at least with the Roadsters, they remember their VIN. You wouldn't do that with your Dodge Ram or whatever,
Right.
or your Chevy truck. But yeah, Roadsters, there were so few of them built, people proudly remember their 4-digit VIN numbers.
That's right, they sure do. Van Goat on YouTube has joined us. And hello, Van Goat. Welcome back. He says hello from Mooresville, North Carolina.
Mooresville. Okay, excellent. All right, so we talked about some of the batteries. Now here's a good one. This is a Roadster tip again. Do not use an impact wrench on your Roadster keyed lock nuts. The amount of force that is required to loosen or tighten these lug nuts is not extensive. It is sufficient to cause locking wheel nut and keys fasteners to break. And what typically happens is, by the way, these are not AutoZone type off-the-shelf replacements that you can go down and get. And usually when you get into a bind with a broken locking lug nut on a Tesla Roadster, it's the worst possible time when you've got a flat tire. And the tire shop says, we can't get your wheel off. Now you're going to try to scour the globe for a locking lug nut, key that is going to be extremely hard to find. Now, what we started doing years ago was we began collecting these, and we would ask owners, look, the best thing for you to do is to replace all your lug nuts and get rid of that locking lug nut. If you do that, you'll never run into this problem in the future. And if you'd like to donate your locking lug nut to our library, we offer these free to the Roadster community. So when you do break one, you can't find one, you just simply send us a picture of your broken one and the letter on the back. By the way, they had 2 or 3 dozen letters on the back.
Right.
And we will send you one. We just ask that you return it when you're done with it. So what we suggest is get rid of those locking lug nuts, take them off. The new lug nuts that we have in stock are actually zinc plated. They look much better than the old rusted versions that are on most Roadsters these days, and you basically have insurance. Now, if you have a collectible Roadster, we understand that sometimes owners want to keep everything that came with the car.
Sure.
And in that scenario, keep your old lug nuts and keep that lug nut key, and keep it with the car, for its collectability. But if it's not a pedigreed car and you'd like to donate, we'll certainly return that favor to the community at some point in time.
Now, since we were talking about removing these lug nuts with a standard or a hand wrench to remove them, and a torque wrench possibly to tighten them down, do you know the torque specs to be able to tighten these lug nuts down to?
You know what? Let me see if the tech tip talks about that. That's a good question. We're going to insert that. It does not have it in here. So what typically happens is when the locking lug nuts are removed, a breaker bar is the best way to do that. When they're put back on, a torque wrench, not an impact wrench, you can't really control the amount of impact on some wrenches because varying air pressures change the amount of power that's put down, and various brands are also more powerful than others. But they definitely will break at some point, and it's probably a tire shop that broke your locking lug nut,
Sure, yeah.
the last time they used it, and maybe they didn't tell you. All right, we've got a question from YouTube. Van Goat, welcome back again. This may be a dumb question, but does it hurt the battery if you keep plugging it in all the time, even if it isn't drained significantly? On a Tesla Roadster, no, because the Roadster isn't going to turn the charging mechanism on until it thinks it needs it. So the best thing to do if you're storing your Roadster is use that yellow 15-amp charge cable. Just leave it plugged in at all times, and the Roadster will decide when it wants a charge.
And on other EVs, the answer is also no. It does not hurt the battery significantly. I was talking a little bit earlier, Van Gogh, in our podcast here about the ideal range for EV batteries, not the realistic range, is between 65 and 70%. Meaning you don't go above 70 or don't go below 65. That's why I say it's not terribly realistic. But lithium-ion batteries, the LiPo batteries that are so common in most cars, and some of the newer lithium iron phosphate batteries that are starting to come out, do not have the memory issues that the old nickel hydride or NiCad batteries used to have.
Mm-hmm. So staying with this tip on charging cables, there's an expanded version of this tech tip in one of the newsletters regarding charging cables and extension cords. I just ran into this weekend. We received a Roadster from California that was bricked, and it got to our service center Saturday morning, and it was beeping like crazy, which is one of the things that Roadsters do when they're about to die. And I was ready to do life support on it, opened up the battery. I was going to take the cover off, and I thought, just on a lark, let me try the yellow charge cable to see if it will accept the charge. At the customer's house, it did not. Turns out it took a charge. Well, that saved me from having to do life support, open everything up, put the cards in, take voltage measurements and all that. And just before I left Saturday, I got an error. Extension cord detected. What that means is that the Roadster sensed a voltage drop sufficient to where it recognized that there wasn't enough voltage getting to the charging circuit. And I thought, well, that can't be because I have a 10-gauge cord. It's only 15 feet long. That must have been a spurious error. So I started it up again, planning to come back in Sunday morning to check on it. I did. Came in Sunday morning, and it quit again with an extension cord error. So what the Roadster will do is give you an indication if it senses that extension cord, and you have to make sure that your extension cord is at least 10 gauge. Now, the 10 gauge extension cord is good for 22 amps, sorry. That's the ideal size. And lengthwise, I don't recommend a 100-foot 10-gauge because you're going to have some voltage drop over that 100 feet. But, up to 25 feet would be okay with a 10-gauge cord. Now you can safely charge your Roadster. It's not going to give you those errors. Now, why my 15-foot cord Saturday didn't work is most likely problems in the Roadster, because what we found out later, there were some PEM problems, and we're still working on that.
Okay.
But your typical extension cords, and Mark had mentioned that they're actually color-coded.
Typically, they are the 14 or 16 gauge cords. At least if you go to your local home improvement center, are going to typically be orange, and the heavy duty cords, the 10 gauge cords, is the one I'm thinking of, are typically yellow, and it's almost exactly the same yellow color that the Roadster charge cable comes with.
Interesting. Okay. So the chart that we gave here in this tech tip was that an 18 gauge extension cord is good for 5 amps. Well, that's 10 amps shy of what that Roadster is going to want and demand.
And those are the little white lamp cords.
Yes.
With the dual plugs.
Yeah. Then the next one up is a 16 gauge, and that's good for 7 amps. Then you have a 14 gauge, which is good for 12 amps, and then 12 gauge, which is good for 16 amps. That is the minimum recommended size for a Tesla Roadster charge, because you're going to draw 15 amps off of that outlet, and assuming that it's a dedicated outlet. Remember, if you have daisy-chained outlets, you're going to have other devices plugged in. You're going to get even less current going to that Roadster. So extension cords, although not recommended, if you're going to use them because you simply can't get close enough to an outlet with your Roadster, make sure that it is a 10 gauge or a yellow extension cord, and that it's not any more than 25 feet.
Okay, guys, just so you know, we are at 57 minutes.
Okay.
Great, thank you. On TikTok, Doc1234 has followed us. Welcome this afternoon, and thank you for following us. And then Richard McFarlane 589 asked us a question. Is there a noticeable weight difference between a flat battery versus a full battery? Where's the edge at these days anyways?
Well, the battery weight doesn't change dependent on charge. Yeah, so I mean, the same weight is there. It still has
Right.
all of the same components. So, yeah, that's not applicable to an EV.
Yeah, a full battery is it's where the potential energy is being stored inside the battery itself, and it's simply the movement of ions from the and I don't remember the direction, if it's the anode to the cathode or vice versa. But as a battery discharges, the ions flow from one side to the other of that battery and then out and service and produce the electricity.
Electrons.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's some, at least when I was in high school, and we talked about electron flow, the flow or direction is a theory, or was at that time. I don't know whether that's been clarified since then, but it's all about the flow of electrons, for sure.
For sure. Lightning Rod on YouTube has asked us a question as well. How high do you think the bar is going to be in another 10 years for electric batteries? Is it 500 watts per kilogram, or maybe even 1,500 watts per kilogram? Where's the edge at these days anyways? I believe right now the CATL has already announced that they're producing a battery that can do 500 watts per kilo of energy. So not 10 years, that's today.
That's now.
That's
What was the Amprius one? That was even crazier, right?
1,000, I think.
Yeah, I think the Amprius one was even higher than that.
Yeah.
And battery technology is moving at an absolutely dizzying pace right now. I think 1,500 watts per kilogram not only is going to be achievable within 10 years, I think that's going to be below the minimum standard.
Here comes Jesse.
Yeah. 10 years from now, we'll be running on fusion.
I knew it was coming. Yeah, well, the whole notion of carrying 1,200 pounds in your transportation vehicle is really absurd when you think about it. Once we get to the point where we have renewable energy in the vehicle, carrying all that weight will be unnecessary, or storing it for that matter.
By all means. And yes, fusion is the future.
Yes, it sure is. We can do another tip. Or we can wrap up. We're at 1 hour.
All right. I think we can wrap at this point. We invite you all to join us tomorrow morning. We'll have the author, Ingemar Anderson, to talk about his book. Next week, if you're into the Roadster scene, it will be Thursday morning, not Wednesday at 4 p.m. like we're doing right now. And it will be Conrad Buck with Mars Orbiter in Germany, who is a passionate Roadster follower, and he's going to tell you all about his capabilities, his shop's capabilities, and what he can do for you in Europe.
Looking forward to that time very much. Invite you to join us in the Gruber Morning Show at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, Tuesdays and Thursdays. And watch our podcast after hours. When we're not live, you can go to Spotify and the platforms that we're on, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, among others.
And again, thank you for joining us, and thank you for participating.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.